how much value are you really getting from your human reading your code anyway?
Welcome to Children Protect Me Silver, where CTOs share the tales and the comments. So start a few big names, innovations unfold. How many CTOs will share their stories untold?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest and greatest episode of the How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast. My name is Scott Porad, and this is my trusty co-host,
Brad Hefta-Gaub.
Brad. I heard through the grapevine of our chit-chatting and text messages. What our listeners don't probably know is we're always just kind of sending text messages back to each other. But you texted me about Uncle Bob this
Yeah.
morning. And I didn't totally know what you were talking about. So I said, let's talk about that on the podcast.
Well,
That,
yeah.
and so teach us about Uncle Bob. I
Well,
know
I
Uncle
don't know.
Bob only in the furthest distance, which is when I hear the name Uncle Bob, I think to myself, well, that's a famous old timey computer guy. But I don't really know a lot more about Uncle Bob than that. So why don't you fill me in and fill the rest of the 40 other people who are listening today on this thing?
Yeah. Well, Uncle Bob is a famous computer guy, old-timey computer guy. I think you got that right. He's most famous for a bunch of books that he wrote. Clean Code is probably like his most famous book from like 2009. He was one of the signers of the Agile Manifesto. He was kind of one of the early, so he's written books on Agile principles. He was a big C++ object-oriented, guru back in the day. So back in the 90s, he wrote, designing object-oriented C++ applications. So basically has been writing books since the mid 90s. Before that, he spent 20 or 30 years in as a hands-on developer for a bunch of different companies. I'm sure he's also constantly writing code. He's
Mhm.
not just an author. He worked for Teledyne, I guess. He was big in the early late in the 70s and 80s and the 90s. He worked in telecom and writing like
Hmm.
low-level systems code for telecom companies.
Oh, so he lived through the personal computer revolution from the
Lived through
70s to
the
the 80s to the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I
That's
think he,
cool.
I think he, I think he's described his own backstory of like got his first computer at 15 years old in 1967, right?
Oh, wow. That's cool.
So, so, um, but so you're right. He's an old-timey computer guy. That's a for sure. That's for sure accurate. And he's
Well,
like
but it's Bob Martin, right?
Bob Martin, Robert Martin.
Yeah.
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 Oh, yep. Goes by Uncle Bob. I sent it to you because he's blowing up on the internet today because first of all he was basically in some podcasts and honestly we could probably get him on the How Many CTOs podcast. He may be a fun guest to talk to.
Yeah, he would be.
He was on some podcasts and basically the podcaster was talking about agentic programming and said, "Hey, tell me what you think about agentic programming, especially this guy that's like supposedly, hey, it's all about code, it's all about clean code."
Hmm.
Um, and he basically said in the podcast interview, he is no longer reading the source code from his agents.
Ooh.
That's the headline. That's the thing that got pulled into the internet zeitgeist. And if you watch the podcast, he actually goes deeper into it, and he basically part of why I sent you the link to the podcast is because he basically said in the podcast what I have been saying all along, which is the 3,000 line thought experiment, right? Like you have a developer who shows up. He didn't use this. This is my thought experiment, right? But he basically describes like, hey, these things write code really fast. You need to have systems around it, control systems around it that
Hmm.
ensure the quality of the code. And so, what do you think the things that he lists that are the control systems around it to ensure the quality of the code? Automated unit test,
Yeah.
right? Automated end-to-end tests. Um, Other sort of like, you know, acceptance criteria around architecture, right? Like you can have static analysis of architecture, right? Um, all kinds of stuff like that. So he listed all of these different things, which basically just, in my opinion, just boil down to like, hey, that's what I mean when I talk about quality SDLC
Hmm.
engineering practices.
Hmm.
And I mean, I feel like it's not that shocking of a thing for a very senior engineering leader who's been writing code and working with engineers on writing code for 60 years to
Hmm.
basically say, well, if you've got lots of control systems in place, not, the decider, the approver doesn't have to read every single line of code.
Hmm.
That doesn't sound shocking to me. But he's blowing up the internet right now because some people are like, "Oh my God, the author of clean code is no longer reading the code," right? And you can get lots of people debating the pros and cons of that.
Well, what's interesting is the author of clean code can probably feed a PDF of clean code to the agent and say, follow this.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what you and I talked about recently, where we were just kind of like we were talking about taste. What is good taste? And I think you asked, as it relates to coding, and you asked the question like, is it definable? And I'm like, well, certainly, like clean code is definable. It's written
Hmm.
down in many books. Good architectural patterns are written down, and have had plenty of debate about them, and there's consensus. So that's all verifiable.
I'll tell you where my mind first went to, and maybe we're just going down paths that are well worn. If I know that I need really good quality controls, I think it is easier to get those in place when I'm building something greenfield. And that if I have a pre-existing system without those things, it's harder to add those things after.
Are you going to try to get me to argue with you on that?
I am not going to try and get you to argue with me with that. What I'm trying to say is where my mind, yes, argue with me on that. No, where my mind goes is, okay, I need to solve the how do I add these quality controls to my existing lines of code? Like my new services that
Okay, sure.
engineers are creating can have amazing quality controls, but the thing I need to fix, not fix, but is, address is the existing stuff where it didn't have that. And what is an effective and efficient way to do that? So there's an effective way to do that. It's pure brute force. And I'm sure that if you set a smart engineer down for a long time, they could go figure out how to get a bunch of coverage on there. And I'm certainly sure if you told an agent to go write a bunch of unit tests, as you go up the ladder of tests from like unit tests to integration tests to end-to-end tests, somewhere in there is acceptance tests. I'm not really sure how they're different than end-to-end tests really. Um, but as you work your way up the stack, it gets a little harder for the agent to, what's the word I'm looking for when you look at the code and you to reflect, to deduce what the test should be from the code. So I just, where my mind went to is like, okay, most CTOs out there have I have a bunch of existing code without quality around it problem. And it's great that Uncle Bob is not looking at his code, but is that the case true when he's like going into a system that, let's say, is like Microsoft Word and it's been around for many, many years and had many, many people work on it and so on and so forth. Although I bet Microsoft Word probably has amazing test coverage. That's probably moot, but you
I,
get my point, I hope. So I'm not being skeptical of Bob. I'm actually just thinking about where my mind goes is for most of the CTOs out there, how do they solve this problem?
how do
Right.
how do they use the advice? Like, hey, you can pay less attention to reading the code if you have great, you know, controls already in place. And if you're
And
like,
how
well,
do I
I,
do that?
I
How do I
don't have,
get
I don't,
really good
if I
controls
don't
in
have
place?
controls in place, then what do I do? Right.
Then
So,
what?
okay.
You can
So,
go
so first of all, I love that train of thought, and I think that you're right. Like this is our well-trod path, right? This is the untangling the ball of mud. This is the,
right.
how do you deal with like older systems, and how do you modernize older systems, right? Okay, so
Hmm.
so let me just say, like, I agree. That's the thread that we might want to pull on. I'm gonna. There's another thread we could also pull on. let's say so I like it, when you read a Wikipedia article about like a war in history or something like that, on the
Mhm.
right-hand column they always have the list of belligerents,
I
right?
love that.
Right? So, okay, so in the war over Uncle Bob's no longer reading code, what are the belligerents? Who are the belligerents and what are their positions, right? And one of the list of the belligerents would be probably people saying, "Oh my God, I can't trust code unless I've read every line of it."
Hmm.
Other belligerents are probably saying like, "Well, you're probably kidding yourself if you think you reading the code is actually doing that much quality control. And that's why we need these other systems in place instead."
Hmm.
So I think one of the threads worth pulling on is how much value are you really getting from your human reading your code anyway?
Mm. Well, okay, so I'm thinking of a human code review, and I'm thinking there are two or three things that are probably the primary categories of exposure in there. One is bugs. Hey, this isn't written properly. And I actually bet that's kind of the minority of things. Another category is what I'll just broadly call architecture, which is like, hey, you didn't design this very well, right? This is going to be brittle. And then I would say that actually blends itself into I guess there's sort of two variations on architecture. One is you didn't do it very well, but then the other is like, hey, if you did this just a little differently,
It would be
like
better,
it would just be a lot more flexible and whatever.
better somehow.
Better somehow, right?
Great.
So that's kind of like the second, but it has two flavors of it. And then the third is well, I see you're using this library here, but did you know that like these other guys use this library over there, and maybe we should only use one HTTP
Right.
library around here, right?
Totally.
Kind of
Yeah,
thing.
love it.
And I suspect I don't think I think it's probably the first bucket is 10%, the second
Love
two
it.
buckets are
Clearly.
25%, and the last bucket is 15%.
Oh, that doesn't add up to 100%.
You're right, it only adds up to 75%. And but we're operating in base 75.
Okay. Oh, okay. So I love it. So I love that that's where you got to when I asked the question, what does reading the code actually do? Because Uncle Bob has an answer to those second two categories. And he says that's what he's instead spending his time on. So he basically says, look, I have the agents justify their implementation to me, and I have the agents build me visualization tools so I can see how did they architect the code. Did
Mhm,
they follow the practices of clean code, good architectural
mhm.
design, the stuff that exists that his definition of what clean code is, his definition of what good. So in other words, if he was already looking at if he was going to read the code, he would be looking for those second two categories, and those categories are actually able to be discerned and in fact could be discerned better without necessarily just reading the code.
And then this gets to another thought. It's a little bit of a variation. So, like, we have talked at TaskRabbit about we have a code review agent does code review for us, and we've talked about building two other types of agents to be in our pipeline. One is an architecture agent. Does this
Mhm.
comply with what we refer to as our target state architecture, what we're trying to build towards?
Yeah,
And the
you should
other is
absolutely do that.
yeah, and the other is a security agent, which is,
Yeah.
that looks to see if it's secure. And we've actually talked about those could be targeted at two different points in the pipeline. Obviously, one could be, they would be different agents, but there could be one targeted post code, just like the code review after it's been written. Does this meet whatever architecture and security standards we have? But also further upstream, could you give it some sort of design doc, either human generated or
Absolutely.
agent generated, to look at that also? And where my thought goes there is, okay, we are trying to build a service-oriented, event-based architecture, right? We are building it for a variety of reasons in a combination of Ruby and TypeScript. And I know that sounds unusual, but we don't need to go into that part of it right here. I got some people who want to write an architecture agent and they want to write a security agent. And can't I just buy that? Like, why are we going to write the TypeScript event-based architecture agent? It just seems like that should be, seems like the guy, like Uncle Bob should write the book and say, this is how you do it. And then all of us can just follow the best practices.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that whoever says they're going to write this agent for you really just means they're going to make sure they're going to collect all the markdown files that list the rules that matter, right? Like that's all that really should be.
But who make
It's
the rules that matter could be standard. They could be a GitHub library, a GitHub repo just standardized across.
Yeah, but your architecture, like you guys have a target architecture. So describing the target architecture that
Yeah,
you believe is correct
right.
is not going to be out of some book from,
There are
Walmart.
layers. There's a first layer of like kind of technical principles, and then there's the actual design of like have
Yeah.
this service and have that service. That's right. That part. I'm talking about that first layer.
No, let me just say, I 100% agree. Like that one of the things I've now starting to see with the teams I work with that is, I think, really paying off is we all like they're all running multiple different agents looking at code and so like one developer says, I want my agent to go do a code review of this. And the way that that developer has configured their agent to like he's really focused on security and correctness. So he
Hmm.
has told his agent, this is what I want you to really focus on,
Hmm.
and others have said other things to their agents, and the result is you get, the more times you run through the probability machine, you get slightly different answers every time you run through the probability machine. And the more slightly different answers you get allows you to get a higher quality answer, right? Like you get,
Hmm.
if you combine multiple different versions, you get a higher quality answer, right?
Hmm.
And I think I've said this to you before. Like I actually think that's why, isn't it the case before AI existed? Weren't there some modules in our code bases where we'd go like, this is a very sensitive module. It requires two reviewers to approve, right? Don't we have modules in our code where we're
Yeah.
like, this one needs two reviewers, right? Well,
Hmm.
that's what is that if it's not two different runs through the probability machine? They happen to be
Hmm.
the meat sack version of the probability machine instead of the silicon version, but it's two humans that are reading through the code and they each see different things and they comment on different things, and the combined answer is the better answer.
Meat sack agent. I feel like that needs to be like a cartoon. Agent and meat sack. Jesus. There's
Well,
always a moment in every episode where we get totally off the rails, and this agent meat sack is it.
Agent Meat Sack. Well, anyway,
There's the title for the episode right there. Agent
Agent
meat
Meat
sack.
Sack. There you go. I guess the thing I'd say is like I don't think it's that controversial to say, like, again, like I challenge you as the CTO, like you're not doing code reviews, but you're accountable that the code is high quality. How are you solving that problem?
A series of checks and balances and processes that start all the way with our recruiting and hiring pipelines, right? Um, I mean, step number one is you just get the smart people in the room who've got good skills and talent and taste and ambition and care enough about doing a good job, and a lot of it takes care of itself. But it's interesting what you, yeah. So that's the answer. The answer is we've got a bunch of processes and checks and balance in place, and that's how code can ship all day long, and I don't have to worry about it. Although from time to time
It
there is
breaks.
something.
It gets
Well, I wasn't
through.
going to say it breaks. From time to time there are things where I'm like, I want to take a look at that. And I might not even want to take a look at the code. I'll tell you very specifically what's coming up. We are moving our production infrastructure to a different AWS region. I don't remember. I always get them mixed up. I can't remember what region we're in, but it's like one of the regions that's like low on their totem pole. So like we get all the updates last in whatever
Right.
region we're in.
Right.
And it also only has two availability zones, and we want to have another one. So we're moving. I can't. We're moving to Oregon, I think. It doesn't matter. Those details don't matter. But this is one place where I said to our head of infrastructure, I was like, okay, I would like to see your rollout plan. And the two things I'm specifically interested in that plan are I want to see action item level detail, like who is doing every single task.
Hmm.
And I want to see the rollback scenarios.
Yeah. Which ones are there any one-way doors?
Right. Are there any one way doors in this? And just because my experience is when there are when doing a risky maneuver like that, where you're trying to move your entire infrastructure without actually taking your system offline, um, if you have implicit things that people are going to do, that is risk. Oh, that's right. We were supposed to have so and so
Right.
turn off the flux capacitor before we did that.
Right.
Rats,
Exactly.
you know?
Rats.
And yeah, the one-way door thing. So there are times, and they're few and far between, but this is a very high risk time because you could imagine you could end up in a state where you're offline, you
Right.
can't get back online.
Right. And so I chuckled because there's been two times in my career when I've had some very uh uh high risk maneuvers to transfer data centers. And the one that flashed in my mind, this was not that high risk, but when Real Networks moved from our first office down in Pioneer Square to our second office in kind of downtown core, our our kind of head of IT slash, graybeard who was in charge of all the things. He had one computer that he definitely did not want the clock to reset on. And so he had it hooked up to a UPS battery that was like, he had that on the battery as he rolled it down from Second Avenue to go between the two buildings. He was like, I
Wow.
am not gonna let this, I'm not gonna let the runtime on this computer get reset. And it was just
I
so
wonder what
funny.
was running on that thing.
It was nothing important. It was nothing important. It was just it was the matter of pride that he wanted the uptime to maintain.
Oh, I see. He wanted the uptime. I thought you meant he didn't want the clock on the machine to get messed up.
No, it
He
was
just
just
wanted
that
the runtime.
he just
That's
wanted the
funny.
runtime. He just wanted the runtime.
That's funny.
Um,
Yeah, those were the days. I do remember. If we can just share war stories for a second, we moved data centers when I was at drugstore.com. It was an 8-hour outage overnight, and it consisted of going with a truck to one place and putting computers in it and driving it to the other place and
yep.
getting them all plugged in before morning.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
so the point is, yeah, there are checks and balances, but even sometimes I do want to check because I would hate for our company to get in a really extremely compromised position.
Well, and the point that I'm making about that is that even in your answer, you had a system for what you were going to validate. Like I doubt
Mhm.
that you are going to say, show me, let me read the code of every script that you're going to run during this. Instead, you
Right.
you kind of zoomed the camera out to the next level and said, and you interrogated the operators to say, like, what is your plan? Give me a very detailed plan here.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
and, I,
that's right.
and what I'm saying is that the point I'm trying to make is that there's way more I believe that there's way more value in the review whatever review you're doing. That review is much more about a conversation with the people that are doing the work or did the work about
Mhm.
did they consider all the things.
Right. Right.
And and even if I'm talking about code, did you consider all the things? That is the conversation that matters. And having me like read individual lines of code, I mean, I can do it. I enjoy doing it. There's value in it. I love the poetry of looking at code. Like there's something artistic about it. I like it.
Yeah.
But I've never just read the code anyway. I'm always going to be like reading the code and asking the developer who wrote it, like, tell me more about why did you do this? What was this that you were doing anyway?
Hmm.
Like, what was this about? Right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's going to reveal so much more. Like the only thing you're going to get out of reading the code is did they put the braces in the place? Well, you should be using a linter and a pretty printer to get the braces in all the right places. Like I I I shouldn't be wasting either of our time on that.
Yeah. I think there's also two other lessons here for CTOs and aspiring CTOs that are worth mentioning. The first is when you have to go to your boss or your boss's boss and present something, it forces you, well, in theory, it should force you to get your ducks in a row. Look, I sometimes have to go to the CTO and the senior leadership team or to our board of directors and present things. And there's just as much value in the fact that I need to make sure what I'm presenting is right than that they actually, I shouldn't say they don't care, but like them actually presenting to them, right? I
Yeah.
find that especially with the whole board presentation thing, is it's really a very effective forcing function to be like, oh, here's a whole thing that we don't have. We don't have this thought through, and we need to get this thought through because that is definitely a question they will ask, and they're only going to ask out of a place of ignorance and stupidity
Right.
because they don't know anything that's going on in
Right.
our world. But they're just going to say, what happens? Why does it work that way?
And right. And you better have an answer.
And you better have an answer. So and so as a CTO, like I don't. Some people I think wield that tool punitively, like they want their team to fear them, and or maybe they don't even want their team to fear them, but their team does fear them, and so I don't do it that way. But it is an effective tool sometimes to just say, look, I'm. The person who's leading this is her name is Megan. Just say that, and it's like, oh, she has to go actually like get her ducks in a row. Then the other piece that I think is important for CTOs, again, and aspiring CTOs, as the CTO, I am the face and the voice of the organization. Now, as my team knows, I try hard to put them in front of the company as much as possible. I don't try to hog the spotlight. In fact, that's I've been given that criticism, which is Scott, you're not out in front enough. I'm like, okay, well, that's not my style. I want to be here. But at the end of the day, when push comes to shove and there's a giant outage or whatever, they're going to come talk to me.
Yeah.
And in advance of this, I want to be able to tell the story to our company. We have an outward communication plan in advance to tell the story to people of what we're doing. And I want to know about it enough to be able to tell that story. And I also want to know about it enough so if it does go wrong, I can speak authoritatively to what was happening. And so
Yeah.
I think the point there is an important part of our jobs is to be the representative and the voice and the face of that engineering team to the rest of the company. And I guess I feel like it's important to do that job well. It builds trust with our team. It builds trust in our team if we can represent our teams well. And it isn't just about the engineering. It isn't just about those scripts and are the curly braces in the right place. It's all about the whole story of why are we moving these regions? Why are we doing it in September and not December? Why is this going to save us money? It's so on and so forth. And how do you know it's not going to screw up and all these things?
Right. And I feel like just if we circle back just to kind of, attach these two threads together, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, the internet's up in arms because Uncle Bob says he's not reading code anymore and he's the author of clean code. What the heck, right? And then
Mhm.
you're giving an example of, and I agree with everything you've said, by the way. You're giving an example about how, as CTOs, do we do a good job of really representing our technical teams and representing the technology? Like, what is the
Mhm.
right level of detail that we need to be paying attention to? And what I'm saying is, I absolutely agree that you need to basically both build systems for quality and you need to spot check. You need to set a breakpoint in the debugger every once in a while and double check like what what
Mhm.
what is the current state of the stack and what is the current state of the variables? Like what are people doing? Yes, we have this program that we're all following, but like
Mhm.
in this case, are they following it correctly?
Yeah.
Are they getting the right results? Right? And so I definitely agree if advice I would give to aspiring CTOs or aspiring engineering leaders is I would say it is really important that you be strong technically and be able to have those technical conversations with your team members to make sure that you don't have to review every line of code they write. You don't have to review every decision they make, but you need to spot check it and you need to make sure that you're paying it that they trust that your judgment is good technical judgment. And the
Mhm.
best way for them to trust your technical judgment is for you to, when appropriate, you know, be in the mix with them and really have a conversation with them about the choices that they're making.
That's interesting. Here was where we might have a little bit of a point of disagreement.
Okay, good.
I do want to get back to Uncle Bob because I have an observation about what he's doing there that I didn't get a chance to make. But as I've gone on in my career, I've been much more okay, about the getting in with the team. I get in with them a lot less. But I'm actually getting in more like specific points,
Yeah.
right? And there's just a few of them, and I can articulate what they are. Okay, they're certainly one-way doors. Like, are we creating a one-way door for ourselves here? They are high-risk operations. like this data center move we're talking about. They are sometimes, although slightly less so, data model designing. And I want to give a little bit of an example of that one, and I find it a humorous one.
Okay, sure.
Um, Back when I was at Rover, we were doing dog walking, and we were in our mobile app. We were making it so that like the dog walker could send like a report card to the owner, like here's how the walk went, and it tracked the GPS of the walk. And then if the dog peed or pooed on the walk or a few different other things,
Yeah.
the
Right.
walker could push the button.
Right.
I remember talking to the engineer who was working on this. I was like, super cool. And I was like, hey, are you saving the lat long of where those peas and poos are happening? He's like, no, that's not in the requirements. And I was like, you should save those. I don't know why we're going to need that data, but my gut just tells me that someday that data is going to be important. I don't know why. Now that's a really silly example because I'm sure that data has never been important. Although Rover now is probably sitting on a decade worth of where dogs have peed and pooed all around the world. I did when I worked at Rover, I bought the domain names pmap and poomap.com. Rover still owns those. So if anybody is working at Rover, you can build those maps. But my point is I think sometimes as the CTO, you have an intuition of like, okay, this wasn't in the requirements,
Yeah.
but uh, we should probably do this.
Yeah.
They're
100%
saying
that.
this doesn't need to scale, but yeah,
Yeah. This one's gonna,
yeah.
yeah.
Or even actually, there was an example today. What was it today? We were talking about, oh, bundling. Okay. We have a customer, a partner who uh, they're a storage unit facility and they want to do, oh, and their partnership with us is people need to have stuff delivered in and out of a storage facility. And they want to actually do a partnership, deepen the partnership whereby you can actually buy the storage and the delivery together, right? And so we have to sort of build this bundling thing into the
Yeah.
system.
Totally.
And I was just saying, I was like, I know it's not a requirement here, but I just we would be really short-sighted and really unwise to not build sort of a generic reusable bundling capability for third-party services because we don't sell the
Yeah.
storage. And like, I don't know
Yeah.
if we'll ever have another partner that needs this, but if we do have another partner that wants this, like,
Shipping.
sure, who knows what? I have no idea. Like, it's just not on the radar. But it just in my experience, I think that's an important thing as the CTO
Yeah,
is
I
that
agree with that. I agree with that.
those are four places, right? One-way doors, high consequences, sort of some intuition about what a requirement could or shouldn't be. I think there was a fourth one I listed that I'm forgetting now. So I've narrowed it down because and the other places I think it's a good team. They'll figure it out.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I agree with you. And all I'm saying is that the fact that you say, "Hey, these are a handful of important things that I would like you to, like loop me in on when you hit
Yeah,
one of these." Because well, and I think that's what I mean by setting the breakpoint in the debugger. I don't
yeah, that's it.
and it might be the case that like another example I can think of that would be in another place where as a CTO with, hundreds of engineers or something like that working under you. You might, I know I've set the breakpoint in debugger at points is when one team is struggling and if you can find a way to basically be like, hey, let's, maybe it's a skip level one-on-one or something like that, where like talk to the EM and just be like, hey, tell me more about what's going on here,
Yeah,
how's, what are your teams struggling with? And yeah, especially if there's, if you can open up the GitHub and you can open up the Kanban board, whether that's Jira or whatever, and look at the real-time dashboard, that might inform you, be like, oh, like there's actually something going on here. This team is struggling in the following way.
that leads into another example. When a project has an estimate that is substantially different than what your gut would tell you.
Yeah, that's another good one.
And and I always approach those from a point of curiosity.
Yeah,
I'm
totally.
thinking, I have an example I use that's from a time at Rover. There was a time at Rover when you could only book an appointment like 30 days in a sitting like 30 days in advance or something. And someone was like, well, we have to make this, further out in advance. And I assumed
There'd be a
uh,
place like one place in the code where it says
we
30 days.
30, yeah, and they could change it to 365. And then we get this big estimate back, and I go to the engineer, his name was John, and I was like, could you Um, Actually, his name was Jan, and but that's John in a language that I'm not sure which language. Maybe Russian, perhaps. That's Ivan. I don't know. Anyway, I was like, what's with this estimate?" He's like, "Well, actually, let me just show you all the places in the code that need to respect. First of all, there is no variable like you're thinking, so I can put that in. But then let me show you all the places of the
I'm gonna have to
system
go change.
that actually have to respect this." And it was just stuff like the date picker when you're
Yeah,
booking your thing and this place and this, and there were 21 places that had to, if you put this new thing in, that had to respect this. And then there was also things in the web app and the mobile app,
yeah,
right? So it had to get data from the back end and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, okay. So I think those are opportunities also to learn about maybe complexity of the system that I don't really understand. And sometimes that leads to frustration where you're like, oh man, who coded it this way? This was terrible. Now we're having to clean
right.
it up. But lots of times it just helps understand the details of the system better.
And I love that story, love that approach, and I think that, approaching these things with curiosity, that's exactly the right tenor to take, right? Like,
Totally.
and just be like, hey, tell me more about this. Help me understand tell me more about this.
We go back to Bob for a second,
Let's go back to Uncle
to
Bob.
Uncle Bob, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay. I was a little surprised actually when you told, so Bob said he didn't review the code. And I thought you were going to say, but he did review, he did like look at the architecture. And, but then you actually said he had agents looking at the architecture
Well,
and that,
just to be
and like
clear,
writing him some reports about it.
yeah, and to be clear, I don't know exactly what his system is.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like I can comfortably, like, he didn't show on the screen, like, his whatever these reports are. I would assume that he, like, the parts of the code that he has to look at to verify that the architecture, that the modules are the modules, that the APIs are the APIs. Like, I assume that that's what he means when he says, "Give me a report that shows this architecture," right?
The
Like,
notion of a report is interesting because often I think about an architecture agent, which is just saying yes or no, versus an architecture agent, which is saying, I've looked at it and here's what I see, which is like almost like an X-ray vision.
yeah, that's what I understood him to be describing as his
That's pretty
process.
cool. That's pretty cool. I don't know Uncle Bob. Do you know Uncle Bob?
I mean, in person, no. I
I
mean,
wonder how many degrees of separation we are, and if we could get Uncle Bob on this podcast.
we'll definitely reach out to him. Like, he's on Twitter, I'm sure he'd be
I
willing to come and
wait,
defend himself.
I I wonder if we could get Kent Beck on this podcast.
That's good. You said you were working on that.
I did. I wasn't working on it, but I think I will work on it. I'm a little, honestly, I'm a little afraid to have Kent Beck on this podcast.
Because he's so famous.
He's very famous. I think he's very smart.
Hmm.
So I'm a little intimidated by that. He has a perception of maybe being a little curmudgeonly. So I
Okay.
wonder if that
So
comes
does
with
Uncle
some
Bob,
rough.
by the way.
Oh,
Uncle
is that
Bob.
right?
Yeah.
So, a little nervous of maybe getting sliced up with my bad ideas, get sliced up. I don't know, but it'd be fun to have him. I once I was at a
Ask him how to
conference.
untangle the ball of mud, and he'll be like, "Why? Don't ever create a ball of mud." That's how the answer is.
Yeah. I was at a conference called Agile Open Northwest about 2008, 2007, 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. And there was a session called Agile from the Old Timers. And it was three individuals. One of them was Ward Cunningham.
Hmm.
I think the another one was named Rob. Name starts with an S, I think. Anyway, three individuals who were they were people who had signed the Agile Manifesto.
Yeah.
And it
I
was
bet you. It might have been Uncle Bob, dude.
it could have been. I just
Robert
most
Robert C. Martin.
he
Could
could
have
have been
been.
there. I don't really recall, but I remember Ward mostly,
Yeah.
and they were just telling the story of like how it came about, and
Yeah.
what their experience was, and I really treasure that memory because so it was just so neat to hear the origin story from the mouths of the origin.
Right.
It was really cool.
Yeah. Well, by the way, that's a great note to end on. And I will say that the only other thing I'm going to say about the internet blowing up about Uncle Bob, is there's another sort of skirmish happening, which is the
Oh,
he's right and he's wrong. But the other skirmish that's happening is who the F cares? Why do we care anything about what Uncle Bob has to say? What's he ever done? And
hmm, that's interesting.
I think that's a I was intrigued by that answer because or that stance because it's like I mean he's like Kent Beck. He's like a pretty influential thought, thinker about quality code.
I mean, it's really interesting. This gets at like a fundamental sociological question. Why do we care at all what deep thinkers think?
Maybe that's what it all comes down to.
And why do we care what professors say and all those types of folks?
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't.
Maybe we shouldn't. Well, I my response is it's not an appeal to authority, but like, yeah, if someone's got a lot of experience and they offer an opinion, then I want to like consider that opinion and think about it and interrogate it. And it happens to be, I've got confirmation bias going on here. It happens to be that I, I also agree with the stance that he's taking, which is that I think people fool themselves when they think they're catching bugs by reading code. Like they're not.
Yeah.
And so do the other stuff because the other stuff is going to get you so much further.
Here's the answer. Over his career, Uncle Bob has said things, had theories, advocated for things that came to be true. I don't know what those things were, but he advocated for engineering practices that turned out to be good practices that helped engineers do better engineering, do better work, enjoy their jobs more.
Over
And so
40
he has
years
earned
plus
the right to
to
say
have an
something
opinion.
and have people say it's meaningful.
Exactly. That's right. And then to
There
have
you go.
them interrogate it and look at it and try to take it apart and understand it. I'm all for people like debating it.
And I'm sure he is too.
Yeah,
Well, I
I'm
don't know,
sure he
maybe
is.
he isn't. But that's why sociologically it matters what he says is because the proof is in the pudding. He has shown us
Yeah,
that what he says is meaningful.
yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, there you go. That's the summary. What do we say?
Smash, rate, and review.
Smash rate and review.
Tell all your friends. Tell your mom. Have your mom tell everybody else when she's out playing mahjong or knitting or at the tennis club or whatever your mom does. And then we'll hopefully get 45 people listening to this podcast.
There you go. All right. It's good
All
talking
right.
to you,
Until
Scott.
next week, Brad.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.
This episode of the How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast was produced and edited by Saffron Hefta-Gaub. Our theme song was AI generated by Brad. Please follow us on all the social media platforms at How Many CTOs Pod. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, X, TikTok, and Patreon, or at our website at howmanyctospod.com. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Thanks for listening.